18 luxury SUVs came ripping across my cattle pasture like they were invading a foreign country. And the wildest part wasn't the engines or the dust, it was the fact they were live streaming the whole thing like they thought they were the heroes. One woman in oversized sunglasses actually waved at my security camera while my pregnant heifers, scattered in every direction, panicked, slipping in the grass, and I remember standing there thinking, well, that's it, I'm done playing defense. That was the morning I stopped trying to protect a ranch and started figuring out how to collapse a criminal operation with hydraulic steel paperwork and timing so clean it felt like scripture. My name's Jed Hawkins. I'm 52, retired Army Corps of Engineers, and 3 months before all this mess kicked off, I thought I'd finally bought myself something money usually can't buy: quiet. 40 acres of Texas prairie, an old 1890s farmhouse with a porch that groaned every time you stepped on it like it had opinions. Oak trees older than half the county records. Heritage cattle moving slow through tall grass like they had nowhere to be because they didn't. I put every dime I had into that place, 340 grand plus 20 years of my life. Building bridges, clearing explosives, eating dust overseas, and learning the kind of discipline that sticks in your bones. I wanted coffee and silence, honest work, and maybe enough peace to convince my teenage daughter Emma that weekends with her dad didn't have to feel like some court-ordered layover. That peace lasted 7 days. Polished entitlement engines growling chrome, flashing expensive paint jobs catching the light like fish scales, silver G-Wagon in front with vanity plates that read HOA, yeah, real subtle, then a Range Rover, a Tesla, a couple Audis, more luxury metal than a dealership lot. They didn't use the county road like normal people. No, they cut straight through my grazing land tires, chewing up wet ground, leaving ruts deep enough to turn an ankle. Out steps this man in pressed khakis and the kind of smile you get from someone who's never heard the word no land cleanly. Bryce Kellerton. Introduces himself like we're meeting at a fundraiser. Says he's president of Willowbrook Estates HOA, starts talking before I even invite him to. Problem was, Willowbrook wasn't legally an HOA in any real enforcement sense, just a subdivision with delusions and matching mailboxes. He hands me a packet and starts explaining very smooth, very rehearsed that they have prescriptive easement rights across my ranch. Says the previous owner, Martha Hendricks, allowed neighborhood access for years, and they intend to continue using the route. Now, I knew enough right then to laugh him off because Texas law on that kind of easement isn't some napkin sketch they needed 10 years of hostile, uninterrupted use. Hostile, uninterrupted. 10 years. Martha had been in assisted living for 3 of those years before she passed, and the subdivision itself wasn't even old enough to make their claim work. They were 8 years short and about a mile outside reality. I could have called the sheriff that first morning, could have cussed him out too. Honestly, part of me wanted to. But there was something in the way Bryce delivered it, too polished, too confident, like he'd run this script before, and it hit me this wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a business model. 2 days later, they escalated. 15 SUVs this time, right across the pasture while Emma was at the kitchen table eating cereal. She froze mid-bite and just stared out the window while those vehicles rolled by like a funeral procession for common sense. Bryce came back with his partner, Sutton Blackwood, property acquisition specialist, which sounded like a job title invented by a guy who loses lawsuits. They started photographing my barns, measuring fence lines, making comments about environmental compliance and future zoning complications, like they were narrating my eviction before I'd agreed to anything. Then Sutton shows me photos of my house ground-level shots close enough to see the chipping paint under the back window angles taken from inside my fence line. That's when my stomach dropped cold. That wasn't road access anymore, that was trespassing. Night trespassing, surveillance. So that evening I went to work. Trail cameras, motion sensors, solar chargers, signs posted clear enough for a blind judge to read from the county seat. You learn things in the Corps. One of them is simple: documentation wins wars. Emotion makes noise. Documentation ends arguments. 3 nights later, 1:17 a.m. One of my cameras catches Sutton's Range Rover easing up along the back fence line. I watch the footage in my kitchen before sunrise coffee untouched. And there she is in crystal clear infrared cutting wire, slipping through, taking pictures of my cattle barn from half a dozen angles like she was scouting a target. Face visible, license plate visible, bolt cutters visible. The whole thing gift wrapped. Still, I didn't call the sheriff. Yeah, I know how that sounds. But by then, I had that feeling, the same one you get around bad engineering when the crack in the wall isn't the problem, it's the symptom. This thing was bigger than one fake easement fight, bigger than one pushy subdivision president. Then the twist showed up in an ancient Buick that sounded like it was chewing gravel just to stay alive. Dorothy Payton, 78, lived in Willowbrook since it was built. Sharp eyes, silver hair, tiny woman voice like sandpaper and church bells. She pulled up one afternoon while I was fixing a gate and handed me a stack of HOA meeting minutes like she was passing state secrets. Didn't waste time either. Just said they're voting to take you down, then leaned in and lowered her voice. Bryce promised the county he'd build a road. Posted a bond. Road never got built. That got my attention real fast. Turns out, Bryce's development company had collected big money for consulting fees tied to environmental and access studies that, according to Dorothy, either never happened or were smoke and mirrors. Instead of building the public road, he promised he'd been routing subdivision traffic through rural properties, mine included, to hide the fact the infrastructure plan was a fraud. Suddenly, the fake easement claim made sense. He wasn't just trying to bully me into selling cheap. He was trying to plug a hole in a scam. I drove to Austin the next morning and sat down with an old Army buddy, Jake Martinez, private investigator, now financial crime specialist, the kind of guy who gets excited when liars get sloppy. We spread everything across his kitchen table: camera footage, property records, HOA notes, timelines, harassment patterns, county filings. Jake looks at it all, leans back and grins like it's Christmas morning. Jed, he says, this is federal. We still didn't call the feds right away. First, we baited them. I started letting things slip around town, at the feed store, at the diner, anywhere ears like to linger. I complained loudly about legal bills, mentioned maybe I was tired, said maybe I'd consider selling if the price was right. Nothing dramatic, just enough to travel. In places like that, news moves faster than Wi-Fi and twice as mean. 48 hours later, Sutton was sitting at my kitchen table, crossing one leg over the other like she was closing on a vacation condo, sliding an offer across the woods 60 grand below what I paid. I asked her why so low, and she leaned in, dropped her voice, and said, "We've successfully transitioned 3 other rural properties this way. Once owners understand the pressure that can build." She said it into a hidden microphone. Confessions really do sound better warm. At that point, the feds got interested, and once they got interested, they got patient. We coordinated quietly. They were already pulling on threads, wire transfers, shell invoices, insurance claims. They wanted Bryce and company comfortable, arrogant, active. And Bryce, God bless him, was addicted to his own confidence. Because instead of backing off, he doubled down. One night, I catch Bryce and 3 men on camera sabotaging my watering system, cutting more fence, pouring oil into feed troughs, which, if you've ever seen what contaminated feed can do to livestock, you know that's not harassment anymore, that's malice. At 12:23 a.m., Bryce stands near my barn talking on his phone and says, plain as day, Phase 1 complete. Phase 2 launches at 7:30. That same night, somebody posts Emma's school schedule online. You ever feel your vision narrow so hard the world turns into a tunnel? Yeah, that. Up until then, I was angry. After that, I was surgical. Now, some folks will say this is where I went too far. Maybe, maybe not. You can decide. But I'll tell you this. I checked the law. I checked it twice, and then I built exactly what the law allowed. Retractable steel bollards along the main trespass route across my pasture, 8-inch structural steel posts set 4 feet deep in reinforced concrete hydraulic lift, solar-powered backup, LED warning lights, clear signage posted at every approach, 5-second activation window before deployment. Defensive barrier system on private property, properly marked code compliant. That part mattered to me. I wasn't building a trap. I was building a line. Federal agents knew. County folks knew enough. The sheriff's office knew there was a risk of an organized trespass demonstration, let's call it that. Bryce wanted spectacle because men like Bryce think cameras are armor. So he organized one, community demonstration, he called it. 18 vehicles. Drones overhead. Phones out. Social media live stream running. They lined up at the edge of my property at 7:29 a.m. Like some suburban cavalry charge, engines revving, people shouting, somebody laughing. One idiot hanging halfway out a sunroof. I stood near the barn with a remote in my hand and Emma inside the house with deputies already staged down the road where they couldn't be seen. At 7:30 on the nose, they accelerated. I hit the button. The warning lights flashed. 5 seconds, longest 5 seconds of Bryce Kellerton's life. Then the bollards came up smooth fast, 3 seconds flat, steel rising out of the earth like the land itself finally said, no. Bryce's Mercedes hit first at around 35, maybe more. The sound, I'm not going to lie to you, it echoed across the pasture like judgment. Airbags blew, glass burst. His SUV pitched sideways, clipped a second vehicle. Sutton plowed right into him. A pickup behind them tried to swerve around, caught the edge, launched half sideways, and went nose first into my cattle pond. Then the chain reaction rolled backward through the convoy, crunching metal horns, blaring people, screaming drones, wobbling overhead like confused mosquitoes. It looked like karma hired a stunt coordinator. And right on cue here came the real cavalry sheriff's deputies, federal agents, county investigators, and news crews who had been tipped off just enough to arrive on time and stay out of the way. Handcuffs started clicking. Cameras started rolling for real. The live stream folks got a better show than they planned. That's when Dorothy's other surprise walked onto the scene. Margaret Smith, forensic accountant. Tiny glasses, calm voice, deadly paperwork. Dorothy had connected us earlier, and Margaret had been tracing the money while Bryce was busy pretending he was untouchable. Right there with microphones shoved in faces and twisted bumpers steaming in the morning air, she laid it out in plain English: siphoned funds, fake reports, fraudulent invoices, insurance games, shell consulting entities. Hundreds of thousands gone, maybe more. Bryce was bleeding from the forehead, dazed, still trying to puff himself up, saying he was HOA president, like that title meant diplomatic immunity. Margaret didn't even raise her voice. She just looked at him and said he was under federal investigation for wire fraud and conspiracy. That was the moment it broke. You could see it on his face, the exact second a man realizes confidence is not evidence and swagger doesn't survive handcuffs. 6 months later, Bryce pleaded guilty. 7 years federal time. Sutton got 5, lost her license, and a couple others rolled over to save themselves. County recovered money, finished the road they were supposed to build from the start, and imagined that suddenly Willowbrook didn't need to cut across private ranches anymore. My civil settlement paid for expanding the cattle operation, repairing every inch of damage they caused, and setting Emma up for college. She wants to study agricultural law. Now says too many people get pushed off land because they don't know their rights or can't afford to fight long enough. Makes me proud in a way that's hard to explain without sounding soft. And here's the part I keep thinking about: sitting on that old porch in the evenings, boards creaking under my boots, dogs snoring at my feet, cattle moving easy in the grass. This story wasn't really about steel posts or fancy traps or gotcha moments, even if, yeah, that rising bollard sound still makes me smile. It was about patience, documentation, knowing the law better than the people trying to weaponize it. Bryce thought authority was something you could fake if you had the right clothes, enough paperwork, and a loud enough voice. But authority built on lies collapses fast when daylight hits it. I also learned something I didn't love. Learning power doesn't always corrupt first. Impunity does. Bryce kept escalating because nobody stopped him early. 3 families sold before me because they felt isolated. And isolation is where bullies do their best work. That's the real poison. Make people feel alone, and they'll surrender things they should have never had to defend in the first place. Morning after the arrest, I sat on the porch with Emma and my old dog sprawled across my boots. Prairie grass, swaying cattle calm again, the air so clean it almost hurt. Peace felt different then, not the naive kind I bought, the earned kind. The kind that comes after you hold the line long enough to prove it's yours. Sometimes justice isn't loud, sometimes it's engineered. Sometimes you don't win by shouting louder, you win by preparing better. And sometimes, if we're being honest, the most satisfying sound in the world is a steel post rising exactly when it should. So let me ask you this: if somebody threatened your family and tried to steal your land inch by inch, would you have waited as long as I did, or would you have hit the button sooner? Where do you draw the line between defense and revenge when the other side keeps escalating and the law moves slower than fear? Drop your take in the comments. I want to hear where you stand on right, wrong, and what justice is supposed to look like when power gets abused. And if you've ever dealt with a bully who thought they owned more than they did your property, your peace, your time, your voice, tell that story too. I mean that. Because the only thing that scares people like Bryce more than a boundary is a witness.